Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on.
They're not dogs, they're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. Are you guys going to want to come film this?
Put him out.
I just see it.
Sighting of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
What is up, Bizarrites, and welcome back to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that, like 5 people now, call Shane Squatch. And alongside me, I have the infamous, big bad, Boo Daddy himself, Sir Orin Felix.
Was that a spanking at the end of that one?
Yeah, and the UB gripping here. I think I talked over. I'm gonna replay just for the listeners out there.
Let's hear it one more time.
You gripping, Daddy?
The spanking and the little seductive moan at the end really just brings it home, doesn't it?
And, because I don't feel like anybody could ever say it better. In the words of one of the great characters from Moana.
You're welcome. I guess it's just my way of being me.
Okay.
So, every show I got to do one. So there's your one for this show.
Straight from the rock's mouth.
Straight from the rock's mouth.
All right, guys. So our next episode of Bizarre Inquiries, which is our Patreon, used to be exclusive, but now is on YouTube live show, is going to be August the 7th. That's a Thursday. It's going to be roughly 7:15 Eastern time on the Open Minds Media YouTube channel. So you guys be sure to submit questions or articles or anything you want us to inquire about. And also you guys be sure to join in the chat while we're going live. It's a lot of fun to talk to you guys and get to chat with you while we're going through the articles and material and whatnot. So you guys don't forget to do that.
And just another quick update as far as the YouTube/Patreon goes. Now that the Patreon is up and rolling again, what I'm going to be doing for the YouTube lives is I'm going to leave them up for a couple days. So if anybody wants to check them out, and then I'm going to leave some stuff up there, but the majority of the video content as far as the show goes is going to be moved to Patreon besides just a couple of scattered episodes. So if anybody wants to keep up on those and you guys aren't catching them as the shows are live, just a heads up, they are going to be kind of pulled off as we go and certain episodes are going to be left on, but just a forewarning for you guys. And as a also prerequisite of that, if you guys want to keep getting all those live video content things, then don't forget to go and check out the Patreon.
And if anyone is interested in being a guest on the show or getting up with us for any reason whatsoever, Shane, tell them how they can do that.
First and foremost, you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys can call or text the OMM hotline. That number is 313-364-1551, and you guys can text or call that 24/7, whatever's easier for you guys. And if you guys missed it, that number is available down in the show description.
And as always, all the shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And now, getting into today's topic, we have something that, yet again, Sir Orin over here, the big bad Boo Daddy, has put together. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Orin to get into what we're getting into today.
All right. So actually, Shane, you were kind of the inspiration for this episode. When you did your previous Spring Hill Jack episode, I've got kind of like a running list of things I might want to do deep dives on. And this is something that's been on the list for a while, but I thought it was kind of in the same vein of what you talked about in your Spring Hill Jack episode. So we're going to be talking about the Mystery Airship Phenomenon of the 1800s tonight.
Ooh. Sounds mysterious.
It's so mysterious. So unless you got anything else, I will go ahead and jump right into the material.
Was it weather balloons?
I mean, it could have been. Sandhill cranes.
Possibly.
Confirmed. Man, you've just been itching to use that one.
I've been waiting to use that. I made that special just for the show.
Okay.
And that's going to be our constant now. We're going to make that a regular rotation as far as clips go.
No, that's definitely what we needed was more regular rotation clips.
Because I don't have enough already. I got like a folder now that I got like a couple hundred in. Because I keep adding 6 new ones per episode. So I'm getting to the point where I haven't recycled them. I keep saying I'm going to leave ones on the board and I don't, besides just making you crazy clips. So, I mean, or your intro clips.
I'm glad we're all being productive over here.
Hey, that's what we do around here. Got to have some fun while we're doing the research.
All right. So unless you got anything else, I'm going to go ahead and jump in.
No, sir.
All right. So the Mystery Airship Phenomenon was a wave of like these strange aerial sightings, and they took place across the United States from late 1896 through mid 1897. So we're talking about a pretty long time ago at this point. But the sightings began in California, and they moved across the country in kind of like an eastwardly direction. And by the end of the wave, sightings have been reported by like thousands and thousands of different people. Most of the reported sightings were only like a strange light in the sky or sometimes a group of strange lights. But there are also numerous reports that people made of seeing like aircraft that resembled like airships or zeppelins.
What the heck?
What the heck? So in some of these cases, people actually reported like encounters with the occupants or crew members of these aircraft.
Have you seen an alien?
And they were generally reported to be like humanoid in appearance, but, quote, their behavior, mannerisms, and clothing were sometimes reported to be unusual. And what does that sound like?
The typical weird early airman sightings.
Well, I was going to say Men in Black sighting.
Well, that
there's
also,
always like
I guess.
these strange details about these kind of vaguely humanoid figures that always like tip you off that there's something weird going on.
I was thinking like the early like airmen or the early, like UFO sightings where it was always the metallic-y spacemen looking suits.
Yeah, I think we're going to probably talk about that a little bit when we get to like theories and conclusions and things like that. But so a lot of these like strange crew members actually claim to be from Mars. So for kind of all these reasons, a lot of people consider this whole phenomenon to be like a precursor of the modern day UFO phenomenon. So all this kind of got started on November 17th of 1896. And several people on that date reported seeing a strange light in the sky over Sacramento, California. And some people even reported that they could see a, quote, vague, dark shape behind the bright light. And other people reported that they saw a craft that was, quote, powered by 2 men exerting themselves on bicycle pedals.
What a
Above
weird detail.
The pedaling men seemed to be a passenger compartment, which lay under the main body of the craft. A bright light was mounted on the front end, end quote. And one eyewitness even reported that they heard like this voice coming from the craft, and it was issuing commands to increase elevation in order to avoid hitting a church steeple. And this sighting was like reported on by multiple local newspapers, but it should kind of be noted that a lot of these articles had like a very jokey, like tongue-in-cheek presentation of it. So is there anything you want to add before we move on to the next sighting?
Just these really early sightings, especially from like the late like 1800s, are always like really, really weird in the aspect of like, I was diving into one a while ago, and the way that it's spun in the newspapers, it definitely sounds like an unidentified flying object. But then you kind of start looking into what people were familiar with at the time, and like hot air balloons weren't really like that familiar at the time. So then you look into it and you realize it was a hot air balloon. Like the 1800 sightings, like, unless they're like balls of light or just like weird things like that, they're always like really weird because it's like, could this have just been somebody's early attempts at creating like a flying device? Because just because like the Wright brothers did it at this time didn't mean that there weren't people attempting this earlier, and it doesn't mean that all the people that were attempting it earlier were out in the open about what they were working on. They could have been trying to work on something, and then like, for example, the Wright brothers put it out before they actually fully got around to it. So I don't know, just kind of like a weird thing to kind of take into consideration with some of the UFO sightings from late 1800s, early 1900s, is that they could be pretty mundane flying devices, but to the people of the time, it was like, holy shit, what is that?
Yeah, well, a lot of that kind of stuff we're going to get in toward more toward the end with thoughts and theories and things of that nature. But just a few thoughts I'll throw in now. we talk about all the time these issues of language and people trying to describe indescribable things with the best language they have. And like you said, this could very well be kind of a product of that. Like you said, if people weren't that accustomed to, these newfangled flying machines, you're going to, figure out some way to describe it. And, this is like horse and buggy times that we're talking about here. And kind of another point, and why I wanted to do this one kind of on the back of the Spring Hill Jack episode, like you said, at a certain point when you get back to these strange encounters and sightings and things of that nature that happened like all the way back in the 1800s, it gets very hard to kind of discern what happened and what didn't happen in these, and like what these things could be in like modern day terminology and quote unquote real world terms,
I mean, and also kind of like I mentioned in the Spring Hill Jack episode, it was a time when people were very religious, but it was also a time when there was a lot of new inventions happening. So that clash of like science with spirituality kind of came with a weird outlook and perspective on things, because when people are trying to describe things, they kind of had this mix of, a very basic understanding of some sciences mixed with, religious or spiritual backing to them. So they try to explain sciences through spiritual means, even though they had the basic sciences at that time.
Well, and not even just the kind of religious aspect of it, but at this point in time, like you said, like the world was changing very quickly. There was a lot of new technological innovations that were kind of happening all at once, but a lot of people were still very rural and uneducated and just basically, farmers and things like that at this time. So, yeah, like you said, this was kind of a perfect storm, kind of just a snapshot in time where you had like two very different thought processes and even ways of living going on simultaneously.
And imagine just like how bizarre it is to see things flying in the sky in general at that time, because now it's we don't even think about it because we're just used to always having stuff up in the air, whether it's satellites, balloons, kites, planes, whatever. Then it was like, what realistically are they really putting up in the sky? It's not like they were going to the corner store and buying a balloon. It's not like there was weather balloons. Like, unless you're an inventor and you had access to helium and doing all this different stuff, it's not like there was regularly stuff in the sky. So you see anything in the sky and you're like, holy crap, what is that?
Well, and it's probably one of those situations we talk about with like cryptid sightings. Like it could be, something that was 4 or 5 feet tall and, you see this weird thing out in the woods and then it becomes 7 or 8 feet tall. It could be the same thing. You saw like this kind of weird thing in the sky and then it turns into this huge airship craft type thing. So
I mean, not to mention like perception in the sky. Like we always talk about how bad people's perception is, even in the woods, when you can see something and kind of mark it with a tree. As soon as something gets in the air and you can't tell exactly how far it is, like when we've dived into like some of the Thunderbird sightings and stuff, like it's really hard to tell exactly like how big something is because there's not really like a point of range near it. Like some of the Thunderbird sightings, they're sitting on the top of like a telephone pole, for example. So you kind of have like a range, but like when it's up, it's like, could it be 20 feet above you? Could it be 100 feet above you? It's like with your perception, it's really impossible to tell.
Well, and again, people at this time really had even less of a frame of reference for this sort of thing than like we do today. So, I mean, probably their initial reactions to this sort of stuff was even more skewed than we are now.
Dude, it's like the same shit as like, have you seen those videos of like when somebody takes a drone through like a village in India that's never seen like drones and stuff like that, and they all freak out about this little tiny drone? Like we're looking at it like it's this little thing you can just smack out of the air, and like these kids are running away from it like it's some kind of like hellish demon or something like that. So also the perception of things of being unaware.
Like UFO sightings back in antiquity. So I mean that makes a lot of sense.
True. Hold on tight, guys. Bizarre Encounters will be right back after this brief commercial break.
But in the meantime, don't forget to follow Bizarre Encounters on Instagram and Facebook for show updates and the weekly live schedules. Also, don't forget to check out Open Minds Media on YouTube and TikTok and tap that bell icon while you're there to get notified anytime we go live. And if you'd like to join the discussion with like-minded individuals, become a member of the OMM Discord community today.
Links are available off of the link tree down in the show description. And now back to the show.
All right, so jumping back in on the November 19th, 1896 edition of the Stockton, California Daily Mail newspaper, it featured what is believed to be, quote, one of the earliest accounts of an alleged alien craft sighting.
Allegedly.
Alleged. And according to the article, there's this man named H.G. Shaw. And he was supposedly like a retired like colonel in the army or something like that. And quote, he claimed that while driving his buggy through the countryside of Lodi near Stockton, he came across what appeared to be a landed spacecraft. Shaw described it as having a metallic surface which was completely featureless apart from a rudder and pointed ends. He estimated a diameter of 25 feet and said the vessel was around 150 feet in total length. So that's a pretty good sized craft. And this part I think is really cool. 3 slender, 7-foot tall apparent extraterrestrials were said to approach the craft while emitting, a strange warbling noise.
Look at alien! Where?
There you go. The beings examined Shaw's buggy and then tried to physically force him to accompany them back to the airship. The aliens were said to give up after realizing they lacked the physical strength to force Shaw aboard. They boarded the ship, which lifted off the ground and sped out of sight. Shaw believed that the beings were Martians sent to kidnap an Earthling for unknowable but potentially nefarious purposes.
What the
So
heck?
a lot of people consider this to be like one of the earliest reported cases of like an attempted alien abduction. But I think there's like some interesting little tidbits and details in here. The main one is, there are these 3 7-foot tall aliens, but they lacked the physical strength to like carry this dude onto their spacecraft. Like that's kind of an odd detail to me, I think.
It might make some sense though, in the aspect of like gravity working differently in space, assumably different on other planets. So like this concept's kind of been talked about in like, of course, sci-fi like Star Trek, the Orville, but the whole concept that, say the gravity is significantly denser on one planet than it is on another planet. If that person or that creature from that planet comes onto the lower density planet, then they're going to look like they have super strength. But on the reverse,
like John Carter from Mars or whatever.
Yeah, the same kind of concept, and like vice versa. If a place has like very low gravitational weight to it, then assumably that thing is going to be weak on like our planet, for example, because you got to take into consideration of like their regular strength on top of the weight of like what the planet's pushing on top of them. So I think that might be maybe some validity to why something might be able to be 7 feet tall but be weak. Might be because if the gravitation's low, then there's not really that pressure pushing down, so they're able to exceed to taller heights. But on the flip side, they're going to be a lot weaker because they don't have that density being pushed down on them all the time.
Well, there you go. We just solved the case.
Scientifically.
Irrefutable evidence.
I mean, it makes sense.
So jumping into our next kind of encounter and sighting here. November 21st, 1896, there was another strange light that was reported in the sky over Sacramento. And this one was described as being, quote, twice as bright as a typical arc light or locomotive headlamp. And what I think is interesting about this particular case and why I included it in the notes is this one was reported by a Sacramento district attorney and a deputy sheriff. And later that same night, there were similar lights reported like all over Northern California in cities including Folsom, Modesto, San Francisco, Santa Rosa, and Oakland. I mean, so even like back then, like Oakland and San Francisco were large cities. So it's not like all these things happen like out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. Like a lot of people saw these lights and these sightings. And actually, it's estimated that on this night alone, it was seen by thousands of total witnesses. And it was also seen at the San Francisco mayor, Aldo Sutro, I believe is how it would be pronounced. It was seen at his house and was reported by members of his domestic staff. So that's something that's going to come up time and time again in kind of these reports is a lot of people who were making these claims were like well-to-do, well thought of, well-respected people in their community. It's not like, the neighborhood drunk was saying he saw something weird in the sky. It was like politicians and military men and things of that nature. So I think that kind of lends some credence and credibility to these sightings.
And I mean, just to throw something else in there too, I know I was talking earlier about the whole idea about like unknown ships, possibly like just stuff that people are working on. And you got to take into consideration like hot air balloon fires possibly, or just fires in general from these things. Like if people are trying to, have a light, for example, or whatever. So, I mean, if there's only one specific case where somebody saw like a burning orb, for example, or something that was like super duper bright, it definitely could have been a hot air balloon on fire. But if you're seeing multiple of these in different cities everywhere, then it kind of throws out the possibility of that. Also on top of the fact of, again, that these things weren't all over the place at this time. So, I mean, it kind of adds some more validity to that. And just to throw in another aspect of it, breaking down that last encounter, I mean, for no reason would there be a reason for somebody that's like testing something out to land, try to grab somebody, put them in their ship, and then try to take off with them. So that also kind of throws out the possibility of it being people testing out inventions possibly off of that aspect. And again, the 7 foot tall and not being able to move the guy, like if they were standard guys, there's no reason why they wouldn't have been able to move them. Like, I don't know. Like I said, some of these things can easily be explained with just unexplained inventions, but like, I'm glad you put some of these ones together because these kind of go into some of these finite details that really can't just be explained away with, lack of knowledge of, stuff that's flying in the air possibly.
Well, and this was something that I was going to touch on at the end, but I think this is kind of a good point to throw it in here. But, I think this could be another one of those situations where there could be more than one thing going on at the same time. Like there could be like legitimate,
like flying under the radar, like I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, extraterrestrial encounters and visitations going on. But there was also, this guy testing this newfangled technology. So I'm going to save a lot of my thoughts on, like the phenomena wearing masks and things like that for the end of the episode. But yeah, like we seem to be talking about a lot here lately, I think this is a perfect example of more than one thing can be true at the same time.
And just out of curiosity, obviously there's a lot of like people diving into historical sightings of like UFOs, for example, but do you know if there's any like historical examples that go back farther than this as far as like UFO abduction or anything like that goes? Or is this probably one of like the first ever documented cases of possible UFO abduction?
So a lot of the things I saw said that, some of these articles that we've discussed were believed to be like some of the earliest versions of these type of encounters that were published. Obviously, going back to ancient times, there's people basically telling these same stories. They're just talking about gods taking them up, in their chariots or whatever. But as far as like modern day sightings go and things that could be construed as alien abductions and visitations, it seems like this kind of is like, patient zero for a lot of stuff that we would consider the alien phenomenon nowadays.
See, and I'm kind of curious at that time if it'd be one of those things that you wouldn't go around telling people. Like, you go around, you talk about like the 70s encounters, the 50s encounters, and people kind of had an idea of things. And, you go around saying you had a UFO abduction experience and people think you're, at batshit crazy. You go back to like the 1800s when I felt like people were a little bit more open to weird things like, just bizarrities, curiosities, like, the Kentucky meat shower, for example, things like that. I'm kind of curious if there's a lot more encounters that people weren't reporting just because they didn't want to be scrutinized, or if there really wasn't anything going on. And at this time, it was one of those times when everybody was kind of like open about bizarre things because they were a little bit more prone to wanting to like research them because, this is around the time of spirituality too. So I'm sure that like that whole aura of things was kind of being looked into as like a whole. And I'm sure that they probably would have related that experience to something more on like a spiritual realm than like we have visitors from UFO or from UFOs type of realm.
Well, yeah, I think like you said, I mean, back in this time period, people were probably more likely to believe weird things going on. Nowadays we think we've got everything figured out with, technology and science. We think we've got nothing left to discover. Back in the 1800s, I feel like people were more likely to entertain the idea of weird things happening. And just on a practical level, like you were saying, if this weird thing happens in a town 30 minutes down the road, it's possible that you would have never even heard about that, just with how segmented things were back then before, even telephones and stuff like that. I mean, seems very likely to me that these kind of isolated incidents that happened in a very specific area, like the Kentucky meat shower, weird things like that could have been happening all over the place. And unless you lived in that exact geographic area, you could never know about it. And then, those type of things could just be lost to time and nobody knows about it. So yeah, I think it's very possible that there was just a lot of weird stuff going on that we have no record of.
I mean, honestly, the reason that people really are able to dive into that stuff now is because we have like the database of the internet to be able to kind of look for like specific words, and we've uploaded all of these different like old newspaper articles and everything up. So, I mean, if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for the internet, I mean, I still think these things would be kind of like scattered because we wouldn't have a means of being able to look them up. I mean, honestly, we're still discovering weird stuff because, I mean, you can look up like keywords, but if you don't necessarily know what you're looking for and it's like a weird event, you don't know what words they use to describe it. It's not like you can go into these old newspapers and type in UFOs, you're going to look up, I mean, even flying saucers. You can't even look up flying saucers going back to the 1800s because that wasn't part of, like, where would you even really start with trying to find some of these experiences, like orbs in the sky, like you're going to find like a million different things that aren't going to ping,
Yeah, and that's something that I kind of had later in the notes, but, a lot of these cases that we're talking about tonight kind of did get lost in history until like the 60s when ufologists discovered a lot of these. So, like you were saying, if it wasn't for, the big wave of ufology and, the UFO phenomenon that started in the 40s and, went up through the 60s and 70s, a lot of these would probably be lost and we'd have no real historical record of these things. And it just so happened that, whatever, 50, 60, 70 years ago, these stories were probably still current enough that people could find this information, be it in newspapers or just, word of mouth or whatever. But, nowadays we couldn't find anything that happened in, the 1800s unless we had the internet to look it up. So, I mean, like you said, I think there's an unknown amount of stories and encounters that have just been lost that we'll never know about, that, there's probably some really cool stuff that happened that we just don't know.
I mean, in all fairness, dude, I found out that there's a library in my area that has one of these sections, but there's like the section that goes back to like the beginning of like when the town first started up, and it has like all the old newspapers, all the old books, like even diaries and journals from people that were around at the time. So it's like stuff like that that's never even been uploaded to like an archive because it's so localized. Like it makes you wonder how much there might actually be. And even diving into those things, I mean, when people are looking into the stuff in the 60s, assumably this was probably how they were finding this stuff. You could actually go up and like look through this stuff and search some of this stuff. Now, it's 2025 and you're looking at stuff from like the late 1800s. Now that's stuff that you probably wouldn't even have access to being able to touch because that's getting to the point where if people are touching it, it's going to start falling apart. So it's like, it makes you wonder how much gold might be sitting in the back of these local libraries that are stuff that you can't touch unless you have a librarian come up and like, open it with gloves with you, for example,
Well, and like we talk about all the time, like stuff that, is just worded differently and people at the time probably didn't even realize what they were seeing and what they were describing. And now if we went back and looked at it through the lens of today and our technology and our mindset, we'd be like, oh my God, they're totally talking about an alien encounter or a big, or whatever it might be. But
a fairy encounter.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a really good point. Like how many of these kind of stories we could find if we just had the ability to do it, and what light would that shed on just the phenomenon as a whole.
We apologize, guys, for the interference, but we will be right back. And now back to the show.
All right, so now we're going to kind of get into the 1897 wave of mystery airship sightings, and this kind of began in February of that year. And at this point, these sightings started to be reported across the Midwest. So like we said, they started in California, and after a few months, started popping up in your neck of the woods in the Midwest. So on February 2nd, the Omaha Bee newspaper reported an airship sighting over Hastings, Nebraska. And on February 5th, so just a few days later, they published a follow-up article that reported that the same airship or a very similar one had been seen again, this time like 40 miles away in a town called Envale, Nebraska. Also, there was a newspaper called the Albion Weekly News, and it was based out of Albion, Nebraska. And this is kind of cool, I think. It reported that 2 locals claimed to see this airship like kind of crash land, but when like the airship should have like made impact with the ground, it suddenly disappeared, and in its place, a strange man appeared, like where the craft should have crashed, and he allegedly showed these 2 guys this small box that he had, and it enabled him to shrink the airship small enough to fit into his pocket. So I think that's a pretty cool little encounter there.
Like, what airship? I didn't see anything. What are you talking about? Nothing happened here. You should have played it off differently. You could have just been like, I didn't see nothing. I don't know what you're talking about. I've been here the whole time. I didn't see nothing crash. You guys are fucking crazy.
But no, why I thought this was kind of interesting, when we talked about the Flatwoods Monster, a long time ago at this point, one of the kind of, ancillary stories around the Flatwoods Monster was this encounter, and some of the details I'm probably not going to get right, but the main gist of it I will. There was this encounter where these 2 girls, I think, saw like this strange orb, ball of light, ball of fire, what have you, in the sky, and it did a similar thing. Like it kind of landed and then turned into like a black dog-like creature, and then this dog-like creature turned into like a humanoid creature. So again, that makes you kind of wonder about things like orbs and the Sasquatch connections, and what could some of these things really actually be, and what could their true nature be.
The whole idea of the others, like I know people hate hearing that, but it's like the more I dive into the phenomenon, man, I just wonder if it's just like we're coexisting with this thing that's beyond physical existence, and once you are able to get past physical existence, you can manipulate physical existence, and just it's almost like I don't know, I've related this to a bunch of different sci-fi shit, but like they have stuff like that in like Star Trek and like a bunch of different sci-fi stuff about these like again, once you're beyond like the physical, it's like going up a dimension. You can manipulate the dimension lower. So it's like, the reason why all of them fit in, the reason why orbs are all connected, like the orbs are what they are, and then they just turn into what they want to turn into. And I mean, that could definitely explain the constantly changing and moving phenomenon. I mean, maybe we're not dealing with Sasquatch, extraterrestrials, ghosts, but just rather this other thing that existed on the planet that may have been, our civilization that came before us, and then they just adapted past being physical, and they've still existed in this space, and they just mess with us now because well,
that's kind of the whole John Keel ultra-terrestrial theory in a nutshell right there. There's this other unforeseen force, phenomenon, entities, whatever you want to call it, that has been interacting with humanity forever, and like you said, kind of exerting their will on us and basically just fucking with us. So I mean, everything you said is straight out of Keel.
Goes right back to the trickster thing, man. Like maybe the whole other is like tricksters. I mean, when you live in a time when you're like, just a weird thing to think about. Like there's an Orville episode that kind of talks about this. It talks about these beings that have moved like beyond physical existence to the point where they're just like infinitely within like time and space. And in turn with this time and space, it's like they need to find ways to like entertain themselves. So they wanted to know like what death would feel like in this episode. So they basically took the crew, they put them in this place, and they didn't know where they were. They didn't know what was happening, and they were all dying off one by one. And they were trying to experience that like through their perspective. So it's not that anybody was going to get hurt, that anybody was going to die. It's just that they could manipulate reality, and they wanted to see different experiences from different perspectives. So, I mean, that could be the same thing with this. The whole trickster entity thing. It's not that they're necessarily tricksters. It's just that they're trying to see and experience things from different angles because, once you don't have death as an option, like you're not really like working towards, I have this time to finish this goal. You're kind of just mundanely existing and experimenting with things for the sake of experimenting with things. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense to us, like why they would just want to jump out of the woods and scare us or abduct us and mess with us and freak us out. But, to something that's infinitely doesn't have time as a factor, I mean, that could just be like, this is what we do. Just this is how we entertain ourselves. This is our purpose. This is what we do.
They're just bored and trying to entertain themselves.
Yeah, that's just like, it's a hard thing to explain, but that's just their purpose, you know? Like,
but wouldn't that be like the most ironic answer to all this ever is, you know, we put all these big, like heady, weighty ideas and themes on this. And no, it's just this other thing, just bored and fucking with us. I mean, you know, wouldn't that be like the perfect, you know, truth or explanation for all this?
Simplicity is bliss, man. I mean, that might be, everybody's creating these super duper complicated answers. Like, maybe it's a lot more simple than people realize. Like, maybe it's just
Occam's razor,
the others, you know? We're adding all these interdimensional theories, all this other crazy stuff on. It's just, they're non-physical things that exist around us, and they just they're tricksters. They have fun. They just mess with us. They need to be entertained. We are their entertainment. It's the same as, you know, when you have ants and you kind of like block off a path and you watch them go the other way, and then you block off a path and watch them go another way, and then you throw them a treat and you watch them, you know, just take apart the sugar and go off to what they're doing. Like, same thing, you know, you're entertaining yourself.
Well, I feel really sorry for these sons of bitches if they've got to like watch us pay our taxes and like renew our driver's license and things like that. So, hey, the joke's on them.
But it's to them that might be fascinating. They're just sitting there like, these things only have a set amount of time. We have infinite time and we don't do these things. These things have a set amount of time, and they're spending their set amount of time doing shit they hate. Like, why? This is why we must study them. Why do they spend all of their time doing things that they despise? This is fascinating. Like, this is their interest. It's because we do this to ourselves.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting when you really think about it, but I've got a couple more little encounters that we can talk about before we jump into theories. So shortly after the last encounter that we read, there are 3 men from Texas, and they claim that they had an encounter with an airship and, quote, 5 peculiarly, that's really hard to say. Peculiarly dressed men who asserted that they were descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. I'm not going to comment on that because I don't want to get us canceled. But this is kind of interesting. And they had learned English from the 1553 North Pole expedition led by Hugh Willoughby. And this is just like some like British explorer, you know, Arctic adventurer type guy. But what I thought was kind of interesting, and obviously you'll know where I'm going with this, our recent Operation High Jump episode, I think kind of makes this really cool and noteworthy and interesting. And, you know, it's just a short little blip, but that's why I threw it in here, because this connection with kind of like aliens, extraterrestrial craft, things of that nature, and the Arctic and Arctic expeditions.
Also, just a weird thing to throw in here with the descendants of the tribes of Israel. They could just be using that as like a phrase, like, we're ancient ones, we've been here forever, we're descendant ones. Like, they might not be using that as like literal as people are taking it. Or even on the other flip side, I mean, you get into the whole like ancient aliens thing, you know, like,
here's an idea, aliens.
You know, maybe all of these ancient religions were based around aliens to begin with. So maybe, you know, the lost tribes of Israel were some type of extraterrestrials. I mean, there's theories out there suggesting it. I mean, I'm not saying they're mine, but they're out there.
I can't remember which one it is. It's like Moses or Noah, one of the two. I can't remember. But, you know, the Bible like specifically says this guy was like pale and had red hair, which somebody living in that part of the world theoretically shouldn't. So that gets back to ideas like Nephilim and, you know, could this guy have actually been an alien? So, yeah.
And they were living to hundreds of years old, too, just to throw that in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I definitely think there's, you know, a lot to look into there. And, you know, I love like looking at these old ancient texts and stories and legends being like, okay, what could this actually mean in like quote unquote real world terms, or just, you know, through the lens of how we look at things today. And I think that's a perfect example.
Like I said, they could just be saying that they're the ancient ones, or like they've been here for a long time. Like they may not be using it as literal, but rather just trying to use an expression that would make sense to the people of the time. Because I mean, I'm sure that, you know, if it was now, they might be using a totally different terminology for something, you know?
Like the Space Brothers or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because during this time, like I was mentioning earlier, people were a lot more linked with religion. Like this was 1897 area. So, I mean, the only way that they could probably have a conversation with somebody and have it make sense to them where they're not going to be horrified is if they connected to their religion and mentioned that there's something from their religion.
No, for sure. I mean, that was probably like most people's, you know, kind of most important, crucial thing in their life at that point was religion. So, you know,
If I don't say I'm part of the goods, they're going to assume that I'm a demon. Like, we got to differentiate this real quick.
It would make sense to kind of cast yourself through that lens. All right, so one more quick little encounter here. So on April 19th of 1897, there was a report that came out of Leroy, Kansas. And allegedly, a local farmer observed like this airship hovering over his cow pen. And he claimed that there's like this red cable coming down from the bottom of the airship, and it was like tied around one of his cows.
Sounds like War of the Worlds, like the movie,
yeah,
not the book, but the movie.
Yeah. But what's kind of interesting is this cable had like become stuck in the fence of the cow pen. And the farmer claimed that to like try to save his cow, he had to go and like break off this part of the fence. Well, when he did that, and the cow had been freed, the farmer, quote, stood in amazement to see the ship, cow and all, rise off slowly and sail away. And so it's been speculated that this is kind of like one of the earliest reported cases of like a cattle mutilation / abduction type situation.
And early technology. They're not using a tractor beam yet. They're using like a literal red grapple.
But it should kind of be noted. I saw from, multiple accounts that this story was like supposedly extremely fake and a hoax and just totally made up. And it was allegedly debunked in 1977 by a ufologist named Jerome Clark. So, take that one with a grain of salt, but I thought it was fun enough to throw in here.
You sure about that?
I am. That I am. But anyway, so kind of like around May of 1897, that's when a lot of these Midwestern sightings of these airships kind of petered out. And basically the phenomenon died at that point. Just as quickly as it started, it died out. So it lasted from like November to February. So we're talking about a pretty relatively small period of time where these things were reported. But like we said, thousands of people saw them, thousands of individual sightings. So
something weird to think about, just to point out here.
Go ahead.
So 1867, the next big wave 60 years later, right? And then it starts up.
This is like 1896 or 1897.
1896, 1897. So roughly like 60 years later or so is about the time when like the UFO abductions were happening. So jump fast forward again, we're about another 60 years later and there's a bunch of new UFO stuff coming out. So why does it appear that there's like flaps every 60 years? I mean, just a weird little thing to throw in here.
Yeah, I mean, that could be one of those nothing new under the sun type things,
So is there going to be another big flap 60 years from now? Like, this is all going to trickle out, all the UFO stuff? I mean, it's already starting to trickle out as far as, like, the government talking about it. Like,
we're going to have blown up the world by another 60 years. There's no way that's going to happen. Now you're just talking crazy.
Hey, according to all the people that we're seeing in the future, we're done after World War III.
Well, it's right on our fucking doorstep, so there you go.
Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back with that bizarre stuff you crave. But just a quick reminder.
If you're interested in snagging some gear from this show, inquiries of our reality, or any of your favorite creatures or topics, hop on over to the Open Minds Media merch store for a wide range of designs with new drops regularly, and t-shirts for the low price of just $15.68. Wow, that's oddly specific, plus shipping.
The link for that is available down in the show description. And we're back with the high strangeness. Let's get back into it.
All right, so now we're going to jump into some kind of thoughts and theories. And this I left a little more open-ended than kind of a lot of our episodes. I thought that we could have some kind of good back and forth on this. Just, the subject matter I thought lended itself to more of a open conversation than as structured as I do the notes a lot. But anyway... So throughout the years, there's been like numerous attempts made to explain, what was going on with these airship sightings. And there's this Welsh historian and writer named Mike Dash, and he said, quote, "The general conclusion of investigators was that a considerable number of the simpler sightings were misidentification of planets and stars, and a large number of the more complex, the result of hoaxes and practical jokes.
You sure about that?
There you go. A small residuum remains perplexing. So at the time, kind of the prevailing theory seems to be that these were like actual, real, genuine airships that people were seeing. And it was speculated that some sort of like genius inventor had developed, one or multiple crafts and was taking it on like a transcontinental series of test flights. And I thought it was kind of funny, like at the time, so many people thought that like Thomas Edison had created this thing that he had to like come out and make this like strongly worded statement denying that he was responsible for these sightings. So
just to throw in another possible theory, and it made me think of it because he mentioned the stars and planets, and I don't know if this is one of your suggested theories, so hopefully I don't jump too far ahead, but the possibility of maybe there was some type of like asteroid or something that was breaking apart at the time, and people were seeing it all over the place, and it just looked like giant burning balls, but by the time it broke down and made it all the way through the atmosphere, maybe it didn't fully, it didn't leave any type of giant impact. Like, that doesn't explain the sightings, of course, with like people getting out of ships or anything like that, but maybe the big sightings where people were seeing all these different lights all over all these different cities. I mean, it might be possible that maybe because we didn't have the advancements in technology to understand, a meteor coming in and breaking apart, maybe some of these sightings could have potentially been some type of like, meteor impacts that were kind of coming in around a certain period from something that broke apart in space at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure, just mathematically, statistically, you're right. Some of these probably were meteorites or something of that nature. Yeah, funny enough, this is like one of the few things I've researched and put together for a show that like the number one prevailing theory isn't, it's meteors. So like I actually didn't see. Yeah, well, we're gonna get to a little bit of that, but no, I actually didn't see anybody suggest that they were meteors. But like you said, I mean, it's probably mathematically likely that some of these were something as mundane as that,
Or I mean, even on the flip side, you're talking about something flying under another phenomenon. I mean, if there was a meteor breaking up and potentially causing these lights in the sky, if there's extraterrestrials around, maybe they were like, fuck it, let's fly in while these things are happening. Yeah. Or maybe the extraterrestrials are here because of an interest in whatever broke up. Like maybe they were following whatever broke up, and once it broke up, they were like, we're here already. Situation. Let's check out what's going on down there.
Yeah. All right, so kind of jumping back in, this like genuine airship theory, it also has support like in the modern day. It's not just like what people at the time thought. So there's this 2004 book called Solving the 1897 Airship Mystery, and it's by an author named Michael Bisbee. And in it, he, quote, analyzed observed flight paths and airspeeds from old newspaper accounts and found the evidence consistent with 3 separate airships flying in the Texas skies. Research led him to conclude that they were built in Iowa by a group of people originally from California. So obviously, I didn't buy this book to read it and corroborate these sightings, but that sounds like a lot of information that would be easy to disprove. So, there could be something to these claims that this guy is making. But on the flip side, a lot of people have noted that while there were like genuine airships at the time, they're kind of few and far between. And a lot of them, the capabilities that they had were far less than what was reported in a lot of these sightings. So, kind of take that with a grain of salt on, both sides of the coin.
I mean, just to throw it in there too, just to kind of correlate it with something else we talked about recently, like Coral Castle, like clearly that guy figured something out and he kept it to himself. It was a mystery that kind of went and was gone with him. Definitely possible with another group at this time, like we dive into this weird ancient technology. People get into the whole thing about like, why is there all these symbolism with these beetles that don't seem like they should be able to fly? Like, maybe there is some validity to there was a group that maybe kind of figured out one of these ancient secrets, almost like the Coral Castle thing. Yeah. There's a pocket of them doing their weird thing and it kind of died out. It wasn't like Coral Castle that there was this monument built to whatever this weird thing was. It was just these guys that figured out how to create like a zero gravity device. And once they stopped using it, that was the end of it. I mean, it's definitely possible that somebody figured something out and it just went and died with them.
No, I think that's a great point. Like you said, with Coral Castle, this thing still exists. Like it's there. People can go visit it to this day. We know it exists and we know this guy built this thing. So whether, he had some otherworldly esoteric knowledge or technology that allowed him to do it, or he was just, an engineering construction genius, that remains to be determined. But
Or
like
just
you said,
looked at
in
an
the
ancient page and it's just, he had one of those minds that it just made sense to him. I feel like a lot of these ancient secrets just take the right eyes looking at it and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and in the same way, we obviously don't have these, mystery airships sitting in a museum somewhere today, but it could be a similar situation where it could be just, like you said, these people or individual or whatever who figured some shit out before everybody else did.
Or I mean, even on another flip side, just to kind of correlate this with not being so like out and mysterious, everybody knows that like Leonardo da Vinci was working on a bunch of these weird airships, and they know he was really into like the weird occult stuff, symbolism, hiding secrets within his writings. Maybe these guys were digging into some old Leonardo da Vinci writings and they were figuring out how to use some of his airships, because from some of the descriptions that I've heard of these, they kind of seem almost kind of reminiscent of what you would imagine some of these like Da Vinci airships would have looked like. So, I mean, maybe it wasn't that they were looking into like a cult Egyptian ship, but they were just looking into old, Da Vinci writing. And again, something just made sense to them. They connected something.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that's possible. I mean,
or they added a missing piece that he didn't have possibly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we see these like crazy technological breakthroughs all the time. And, they say like technology and innovation is not just a steady continuum, like it's fits and starts. And then, somebody will, like you say, look at something with fresh eyes or discover this new little piece that kind of unlocks these huge advances. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a very real possibility and, a good theory to throw out there.
I mean, I had somebody on Inquiries recently that was talking about this. It was a new way of connecting EVP, but basically he said that he discovered it from writings from like 1850 something. And the way that he was trying to explain it, it didn't necessarily fully work with like the technology they had at the time. So he took that idea, added it with modern technology, and basically discovered a way that you can have auditory EVPs like as you're talking. Like he basically found a way to run through this program using this single track thing and make it so that you could talk to it and have it respond right away. The technology was there. Like the person understood the concept, but it was a matter of new fresh eyes with new technology on it that it made sense and it worked. Same thing for these again. You're looking at these ancient writings of airships, Da Vinci, whoever was writing them, and the theory of it made sense at the time, but they didn't have the technology to make that practical and work. Somebody later on takes it, and it's not even that they discovered anything crazy or secret or anything like that. It's just a matter that they were the person that found it, and they said, oh, you add this piece of what we have today, and this thing's going to work now. Like, it may not be as crazy as these people are looking through occult writing, but rather that they were just like, all right, if you added this piece of modern technology to this would work. And boom, there you go. You have something that floats and is some type of airship, because the technology for something that floats and flies, like, isn't that crazy. Like, that's why people figured it out early 1900s. So this was around that time when people were clearly working on this stuff behind the scenes.
Well, and bringing it back around to kind of the UFO phenomenon, and, all you listeners out there, I know people's mileage varies on him, and so take this with a grain of salt. But like Bob Lazar has said, we understand theoretically like the alien propulsion system. We just can't replicate it. So, I mean, that's kind of the same thing you're talking about here. Like theoretically, you can understand the technology and how something operates and how it works, but you're just not quite there to make it happen. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting thought. And it could be, like we said, a piece that can unlock a lot of these mysteries that we talk about on the show is, maybe they're not as out there and strange as we think they are. And we talk about all the time how, one person's magic is another person's technology. And this is just kind of par for that course.
Hey, one day, man, maybe it'll theoretically be possible that we have time machines and we'll actually be able to go back and explain these mysteries. But like I was mentioning on the Spring Hill Jack one, like I mentioned on the Kentucky Meat Shower, it's one of those ones that it'll always drive you crazy, because it's one of those ones that will never get figured out, because the farther we get away from it in time, the less likely that is. And we haven't figured it out yet. So it's like, it'll always remain a mystery unless we somehow create a time machine, which, there's a lot of theories on that not even potentially ever being possible. So, I mean, still drives me crazy. Like, why? I just want to figure these things out,
Hey, some things it's okay not to know.
Hey, it's fun to create theories about it, because then you can't be proved wrong, right?
So, jumping back in, hoaxes and publicity stunts have also been kind of, blamed for a lot of these sightings, if you will. And it's been said that balloons or kites with candles or lanterns tied to them could be responsible for some of the simpler sightings. So,
You sure about that?
I'm going to throw that in. That's going to be a regular rotation now.
Okay. So that's kind of, what you were saying earlier.
We're going to use that anytime the idea of weather balloons, ball lightning, any of those are brought up. It's just, are you sure about that? You sure about that?
So it's also been said that some of the more like complex sightings with the different individuals and the actual, airships and craft could have been the result of, quote, enterprising reporters perpetuating journalistic hoaxes. And people have said that a lot of these articles are kind of easy to spot because they have like a very tongue-in-cheek tone and they have an accent on the sensational. And that kind of goes back to the first encounter that we were talking about, the one in Sacramento, California, where it was widely reported in the newspapers at the time, but they all had like a very jokey kind of bend to the articles.
I mean, even to bring it into like the 50s, dude, like we're talking about like the Hopkinsville Goblins. They didn't report on that very accurately. That's where the whole term little green men came from. They started reporting on them as little green men because journalistic integrity, people have to take into consideration, was a lot different back then than it is now. Now, people get fact checked. They're held responsible if they report anything wrong. Back then, people were still kind of held responsible, but you could get away with these crazy out there stories, and you could also hoax things way easier because you didn't have people tearing it apart with AI and everything else now. So it's like with a lot of these early stories, that's the also hard differentiation is the journalists because they're. Again, it's you don't know what the mindset of the journalist was, and it was also relatively known that there was a lot of journalists that would stage hoaxes for the fact of having a good story.
Well, and apart from hoaxes, something that I came across multiple times doing the research for this is at this point in time, there's this phenomenon, whatever, called, and I didn't include this in the notes because I don't know if this is like a racial slur or not, but it was called yellow journalism. And it was basically this idea that people would print kind of out there crazy stories that like everybody knew were out there crazy stories and were just made up to kind of be entertaining. But, they did appear in newspapers beside real accounts, but everybody was kind of the understanding this is kind of a joke, tongue-in-cheek thing. So again, like you said, the further removed we get from these times, that becomes harder and harder to discern because like you said, now where everything is just fact-checked and fake news to death, something like that would never get past the censors and everything else. But, back then this was a totally normal thing that happened and everybody just understood and realized and, probably wouldn't give it a second thought. But now, 100 years later, people discovering that same thing would take it, as gospel. So just another interesting thing to think about in these old, outdated stories that we just might not know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, just to throw it in there, I don't know if it's necessarily a racial thing because just out of curiosity, I looked up yellow-bellied, and usually it's, an expression used for things that are people are easily frightened, lacking bravery. So the term yellow journalism could have been from using the term yellow-bellied, saying like frightening journalism, like stuff that's going to frighten you. But even with that, like I was kind of leading to the point of, at this time, people didn't have TVs. They didn't have, they were entertained by stories. They're entertained by people telling stories. They're entertained by reading stories, just stories in general. So I think people were a lot more lenient on the journalism if it gave them a good story, just for the sake of that was also their means of entertainment at the time. Yeah. So, I mean, the whole yellow journalism could have came from frightening journalism, which could have been viewed at that time as like entertainment to begin with, because it was frightening journalism,
Well, and kind of bringing it back to something we talked about on our last episode of Bizarre Inquiries, this is kind of the whole Hunter S. Thompson idea of like gonzo journalism, where like it kind of blurs the lines between fact and, fiction and, are these stories, are they autobiographical? So, I mean, I think it's kind of funny. We literally just talked about that, and I didn't kind of put those pieces together till we were just talking it out here. But, this idea now, we just assume anything that's, printed and considered quote unquote news is supposed to be 100%, factual. And if it's not, people get pissed off and revolt. And, that seems to be just from, the past couple things we've talked about, a relatively new concept. People were obviously in, olden times, much more, kind of liberal with their thoughts and ideas and what they're willing to accept from quote unquote news sources.
I mean, another way of possibly going about it too is you kind of have to get a feel for like the writer, because obviously, like if you read Hunter S. Thompson out of context, you're just going to assume that he's reporting things factually as a journalist or a reporter would, exactly how they are. So, I mean, you kind of have to put some time into possibly looking at who wrote the articles, what newspaper it was possibly coming from, and kind of view the track record of like that writer as a whole. Like if you have this writer that writes about stuff going on with farmers. This local farmer got his cow stolen. This local farmer, whatever. This local farmer, blah, blah, blah. There's going to be rain. And then all of a sudden they write the story about this local farmer saw this weird thing and it took one of his cows. Then maybe that's something to look into, because that's not typically something in the writing form. But if you have somebody that's, from these early 1900s and they're like, here's a giant, here's this, here's that, here's this, here's that. I mean, they definitely could have been a person that was just interested in the phenomenon. But on the flip side, you got to also take into consideration that they were just trying to chase the craziest stories and in turn probably playing telephone with them a bit.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, if you've got someone who's considered like this literary, journalistic figurehead giant, whatever, like Hunter S. Thompson, it's easy to go back and kind of get that body of work and make those, make those calls on things. But if you've got this random small town journalist from the 1800s, it's not so easy to go back and quote unquote fact check those sort of things. So here again, just another thing in these sort of situations that's probably lost to time at this point.
Yeah, honestly.
All right, guys, we got to take another break. We'll be right back. And now we're getting back to the bazaar. All right, so we've gone kind of long this episode, but I figured we'd have some good conversation with this one. So I'll kind of try to breeze through some of the miscellaneous and conclusions, and we can kind of share our thoughts here to wrap up. But like we've kind of talked about, a lot of these sightings and encounters were reported by newspapers nationwide. But a lot of these reports, many of the eyewitnesses were, quote, openly mocked and ridiculed, dismissing them as drunks, fools, and liars. So here again, nothing new under the sun. That's exactly how we treat people who see UFOs and cryptids and weird things now. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I just had to throw that quote in there just because it's as timely as ever now.
And just to throw in another part too, at these times, think about how easy it was to have somebody just like thrown into an insane asylum. It's not like now where it's like, all right, they're being held against their will. We can only hold them for 24 hours. It was like, my wife's fucking crazy. She needs to be put in here, and her rights are stripped and she's just in there. So I think that's something else people take into consideration at that time, is how easily they could have all their rights stripped and thrown into an insane asylum.
Well, that's kind of a good segue into the next thing we're going to talk about. So at the time, there was this San Francisco attorney, and his name was George Collins. And he came forward and said that several months prior to, the start of the sightings, he was contacted by a local dentist named E.H. Benjamin. And allegedly, this Benjamin fellow was seeking legal counsel regarding the world's first practical airship. And this Collins guy made these claims to like multiple newspapers, but he became like the subject of ridicule in the community. And he was nicknamed Airship Collins, which, isn't bad as far as nicknames go. I think it's kind of catchy. But anyway, he was kind of forced to later recant this story, and he like retreated from public view. So like you said, I mean, as bad as, people are ridiculed for things like this nowadays, at least we've got like the internet and podcasts and platforms where, people can tell stories without fear of ridicule. Back then, like you said, you might as well just have been considered crazy and possibly, institutionalized.
Do you, just out of curiosity, because that was in San Francisco, do you think that that's where some of the inspiration came from for Jefferson Airship, Jefferson Starship, that whole band maybe? Was from that guy's nickname?
I didn't see anything about that, but it seems possible.
I mean, San Francisco, that's where they came from. Acid Wave. I mean, they're definitely into UFO psychedelics. I mean, I never put two and two together, but maybe that's where the name came from.
No, that's a good point. So I got one more little blip kind of piggybacking off that last one. So there was a former California Attorney General, and his name was William Henry Harrison Hart, which is a mouthful.
Yeah, I was about to say that's a mouthful.
Yeah. They could have done some editing on that name.
How bizarre.
He needs like
How bizarre.
he needs one less middle name. But anyway, he came forward saying that he was contacted also by the inventor/inventors of the airship. And he made a lot of kind of like outlandish claims. But he said that the inventors were, in fact, this E.H. Benjamin fellow who we just talked about, and another individual that he referred to only as Dr. Catlin. But this guy like also later recanted his story and retreated from public view. But what's kind of interesting about him is before he did that, he had like an interview with a local newspaper, and he said that he was like this amateur tinkerer and inventor. And this George Collins guy that we talked about in the previous encounter was his attorney. So there's a lot of weird connections and synchronicities there. But, you know, like we said, this was a long time ago. We basically have no idea what connection, if any, these two guys, Collins and William Henry Harrison Hart, had to like the airship phenomenon or the possible inventors of it. But those were just two kind of things that I picked out because I thought it was kind of interesting to point out. You know, as much as things change, they also really stay the same. And people who report seeing these weird things are, you know, very subject to ridicule.
I mean, it could either be one, the whole aspect of, you know, a Sasquatch sighting happens and somebody pops out and goes, I was the guy in the suit, when they obviously weren't the guy in the suit. Or on the flip side, you literally have, like I was kind of mentioning earlier, a Coral Castle situation where this guy's like, no, dude, I figured something out. Here it is. It was me the whole time. And just because it seems like it was so ridiculous, like people aren't going to believe it, you know? Like that at a certain point, it's kind of one of those things that if a weird phenomenon happens and somebody comes out and they explain it and they have all these things that are just like, yes, it was me. Like people enjoy the mystery. Like I feel like there's still going to be a huge faction that doesn't believe it, regardless of the information that you put in front of them. And I'm not saying this guy came out and said, here's my fucking airship, but like just in general, I mean, I feel like the only way to practically go about that, which you wouldn't be able to do now, is to say like, all right, recreate it. Let's see. And again, it's like just too far in time now. You can't.
I feel like in things like this, there's always going to be people out there who are just, you know, trying to get attention. It kind of reminds me of like with these like high profile murders and killings, like John Benet Ramsey type stuff. There's always going to be these fucking weirdos who come out and like claim they did it when obviously like we know they didn't do it. But, you know, these are just people trying to get attention. And, you know, it's kind of similar to that. I mean, whenever something weird that gets a lot of notoriety happens, there's always going to be fucking weirdos who want to take advantage of that for whatever reason they want to take advantage of it.
Man, they needed Giorgio back then, so we could just hit him with the...
Here's an idea. Aliens.
Aliens. All right, so kind of rounding everything out, you know, a lot of these thoughts and theories I'm going to throw in to kind of tie us up are things we've already talked about, but it's kind of funny to me, like the number of sightings during this wave that were reported by like well-respected, high-profile people. We talked about the politicians and the military men and things of that nature. And, you know, thousands of individual reports were made, and it's been estimated that, you know, as many as 100,000 individual witnesses might have seen something. So that's, you know, a lot of people, a lot of well-respected people who saw things. So, I mean, that leads me to believe that something was going on, even if you know, take out all the sensationalized newspaper articles and things like that.
I mean, regardless of the amount of people that see it, like there's still stuff that just lives in obscurity. Like just another prime, more recent event, like the stuff at the O'Hare Airport. Like how many witnesses saw UFOs over the O'Hare Airport, yet it still lives in obscurity. Like there's a lot of these recent sightings where there's like 100 people will see it, and it's still, it just gets thrown off. Like it's not a mainstream news thing. Like the O'Hare Airport sighting, dude, that should have been on the front page of every single newspaper across the world, but just thrown off. You know, it doesn't matter the amount of people that actually saw this thing.
Well, you know, and we're weirdos, you know, stuff like the Miami alien thing that happened a year or so ago or whatever. Like stuff
I'm sure most people forgot about that already.
Exactly. Stuff that's like huge in our little circle, in our little community that, you know, just makes everybody go crazy for like that's not
Peruvian
even a blip on the radar
peelers?
for
Another
Yeah,
one?
like stuff like that. Well, it's been like 20 minutes since you talked about the face peelers. So,
well, for me,
time.
yes, but you know, like I've been on that shit for like a year and a half, and it's just like even in the community, bro, I barely hear anybody mention it. Like that was a crazy fucking story. Like that was unfolding as we were talking about it. That people are getting snatched out of the woods by these people on fucking
people up?
flying like hoverboards, and it's just like, how is that not everywhere? Like that's crazy to me.
Yeah, and you know, like you said, you don't even hear much about that in like the paranormal alien community now. So like the, you know, larger world as a whole, that was barely a blip on the radar. So.
Even if it was humans, like a lot of people are theorizing because of like the main girl that had the experience that, you know, she actually got away from these things and heard him speaking Spanish and stuff. Even if it was humans, it's still just as fascinating. Like what the hell type of technology do they have? Why were they trying to peel people's faces off? Like, it doesn't matter if it was human. It like, don't throw it off. It's still just as fascinating, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there's always something to unpack in these sort of stories, no matter how ridiculous they seem. And, you know, I think this is a perfect example of it. Like I say, there's always some nugget of truth in most of these weird, crazy encounters and sightings and stories. And, you know, this is a perfect example of a lot of things we've talked about on the show, you know, like the phenomenon wearing masks and presenting itself differently at different points in time. And these ideas that the technology always seems like slightly ahead of what we currently have, but it's like something that we can comprehend. So, you know, back then they had these airships, and then it was like kind of the, you know, rocket ship space men idea. And then Betty and Barney Hill and the Greys. And then that was kind of the prevailing, idea of extraterrestrials. So, you know, just a lot of random thoughts there. But the thing that I really wanted to kind of make my go home point on is, like we said, I'm sure a lot of these things were fabricated by newspapers. I'm sure a lot of these lights were totally normal, easily explainable natural phenomenon. The thing that's so interesting about this story to me is, you know, this whole idea of the phenomenon wearing masks, or what all this could actually mean, because even if these were made up articles and things that people were printing, it like tapped into so many future tropes of like the UFO phenomenon, and even like Men in Black and cattle mutilations and things like that. So did the phenomenon like later adopt these made up tropes and things that were in these articles? So it's a really interesting like chicken and egg situation. And that's where I kept coming back to with this, is which came first. And I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts on, you know, kind of some of those ideas.
Well, one main thing I got to throw in here, the whole idea of like it mimicking what our idea is of it. You know, the whole anal probing thing, like obviously that's not part of the phenomenon by any means, but it's part of like the normal viewpoint on what most people think like
unless
an alien
you've had
abduction
enough
is.
Cold beers.
Yeah, unless you've had enough cold beers. But I mean, like there's certain aspects of the phenomenon that seem like it kind of shapes around us. But on the other side of it, it also kind of seems like it has like a mind of its own. So I kind of get into partially what you were saying, that it's kind of like it's this thing that exists outside of us, like the others is kind of like a good other viewpoint of kind of saying it. And it isn't necessarily mimicking what we think of it, but rather that it's mimicking what we would be able to understand and perceive in a way that it thinks that we can perceive it, you know, like,
yeah,
that's kind of like the viewpoint that I'm thinking it is. That's why they're like just ahead of us. They're, you know, because assumably if there's an extraterrestrial group that's intermingling with us, that's coexisting with us, that's doing whatever with us, you know, they were significantly more advanced than us to even get here in the first place. So it's not like they're just ahead of us. Unless you get into the theory that there's something that exists on this planet, then they could potentially be literally just that gap ahead of us, where maybe it is something more physical and it's a matter of like, you know, a civilization that's just a hair bit more advanced than us. But if there's something that's coming from another point in space, like they're significantly more advanced than us. So it wouldn't be that they're just ahead of us. They would be significantly ahead of us. So then I kind of get into the idea of, like you were saying, that, you know, they're kind of just doing what we might be able to understand, or at least trying to explain it in a way that we might understand. Going back into even like the Tribes of Israel thing, you know, you show up and you say, you know, I'm an extraterrestrial from the planet Mars, these people are going to freak out. But if you say like, oh, I'm an ancient people that have been here, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, what do you have to say? What do you? So it's just a matter of like not necessarily taking all the details, but it's kind of like collaborating at the same time. Like it has a mind of its own, but it's also taking some of the details that we think of it so that it can be more explained from our viewpoint or our perspective. Because if you're interacting with another species, like of course there's going to be some point of fear, but if you have an existing notion of it, then it's a little bit less fierce. Like it's still going to be, scary, but it's less like if you had no idea of the concept of aliens as a fucking whole, and then these things showed up, that's going to be a lot crazier than if an alien shows up and you already have this existing idea of aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's crazy no matter what, but it's a whole other level of crazy when you have no previous idea of this thing.
Yeah. And I think, well, like I said, that's kind of my takeaway point from all this, apart from how accurate or not accurate a lot of these stories and accounts are. It just seems to me that the phenomenon, whatever that is, whatever people want to, wrap up into that, it seems to me that it obviously goes both ways. We're imprinting something on the phenomenon, and the phenomena is imprinting and presenting something on us. And
like we need each other to coexist in a weird way,
And I think that's a really interesting thought, is things like this really illustrate how complicated all this stuff is. And it's not as simple as, hey, there's these Martians coming down in their spaceship. There's something way fucking weirder than that going on. And, on the surface of a lot of these stories, these people saw this weird airship. But like I always say, dig a little bit below the surface and you start seeing all this weird stuff and these weird connections. So, that was kind of my take home point with all this. And this was a kind of a difficult one to research. Actually, I think the episode turned out better than I thought it would just from the material. I thought this was one that would, warrant a lot of back and forth and conversation, but hold that thought. We'll be right back. But if you don't like hearing the ads, then boy, do we have a solution for you.
You guys can get ad-free and early access to this show and Inquiries of Our Reality on the Open Minds Media Patreon for just $2 a month. That's less than a bag of chips. And it's a great way to support the show and all the hard work behind it. And if you're interested in bonus content, merch store discounts, premium video versions of the show, along with some other perks, then become a member of the OMM family today or give it a try with a 7-day free trial.
The link to that is available down in the show description. And now back to the show. Yeah, that's basically all I got for this one. That's all I got. Is there anything that you want to throw in?
Well, I just want to throw in that I'm glad that you put this together with the details that you did, because obviously, I dive into a lot of these old sightings and stuff, but for the most part, usually a lot of the ones around the 1800s, 1900s, I kind of chalk up as, people with flying air balloons, things like that people just didn't understand, and they created this whole story around it. And even though we knew that they existed at the time, they kind of created this own pocket story somewhere else that just begin to get more obscure through time. But I'm glad that you kind of differentiated this, kind of broke stuff up, and especially added the details of encounters with these things, because a lot of these stories, you don't hear about the encounters. You just hear about sightings up in the sky, which is what I brought up earlier with a lot of these ancient sightings too. It's mainly just sightings up in the sky. So I'm glad that you were able to find the details for this, and that you were able to kind of differentiate and at least kind of bring some more mystery to the early 1900s UFO type sightings, at least for me, because like I said, I kind of chalked most of them up to people sightings, and I'm glad that you kind of added a new nuance of mystery to that for me. And assumably to a lot of the listeners out there.
Well, I hope so. This was not something I knew a lot about before I did the research for it. But I was kind of astonished the amount of connection. I was expecting this to be more along the lines of Spring Hill Jack, kind of just this more folklore-y type thing. And then the more I got digging into this, I was like, oh my God, this connects to so much stuff that not only we talk about on the show, but are these very current ufological concepts. So, I think, like I always say, this is just one of those situations where just do a little bit of digging below the surface and look for the connections and look for what stuff could really mean in real world and current terms. And I think this is a perfect example of that.
And like I said, just adding some more different theories and stuff into it. I definitely like the possibility of, people almost kind of having the idea of, like I said, with Coral Castle, that somebody just figured something out and it just died with that pocket, unfortunately. I honestly want to know if that guy was telling the truth. Like, that guy could have literally came out and had the paperwork to describe how this stuff works, and he just disappeared, blip in time.
Yeah, it could be as simple as that, or it could be way weirder, and we'll never know at this point.
And with that, of course, if you guys enjoyed today's conversation and want to show some love, we definitely appreciate it if you guys left a review or rating for the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any podcatcher you happen to use. Your continued support is what makes the show possible, and your opinions go a long way to help the show grow and improve. And if you guys know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, share with a friend, because grassroots support from listeners like you guys is exactly how this show grows. So thank you.
And if anyone out there would like to get in touch with us for any reason whatsoever, Shane, tell them how they can do that.
First and foremost, you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of us through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that we're the most active on. Or you guys can also get a hold of us through the submission form, which is available up at the top of the link tree. And the last way you guys can get a hold of us is through the hotline. That number is 313-364-1551, and you guys can text or call that 24/7, whatever is easier for you guys. Doesn't matter how you guys get a hold of us, but make sure you guys get a hold of us, because we would definitely love to hear from you.
And you guys be sure to check out and show some love to our friends and sponsors of the show. We've got our buddies Rick and Hans with I Know Squatch for all your squatchy gear needs. We've got our buddy Dave, aka the Snarly Yow, with Snarly Yow Natural Products. We've got our buddy Joe with Cryptoteology for, you ready?
Ready. I'm ready.
For all your wearable cryptids.
There it is.
And then we also got Big Ape Threads.
And if you guys got some additional time, check out our awesome friends with the affiliate links, Dimension Devices, Oregon-ite, and Sticker Mule, with additional discounts and credits available. More information on that is available down in the show description.
And as always, all this shit is in the link tree in the show description.
And as we tend to do, stay bizarre over here. So as we tend to do, and as we tell you guys every single week, don't forget to always, always stay bizarre. Bizarre. Bizarre.
A Zeppelin?
Look, an alien! Where?
You sure about that?